in the hushed corridors of Tudor history, where power shifted with a whisper and alliances crumbled overnight, few voices echo as hauntingly as that of Anne Boleyn. Though silenced by the executioner's blade, her words, preserved in scattered letters and fragile manuscripts, remain vivid, intimate, and defiant. These writings are more than relics. They are living fragments of a mind navigating love, betrayal, ambition, and faith in a perilous court. To read Anne's letters is to step into the inner sanctum of a woman who helped reshape a nation, not with an army or a crown, but with ink, intellect, and an unyielding voice. Few historical figures captivate the imagination quite like Anne Boleyn, the ill-fated second wife of King Henry VIII. Her rise from a relatively obscure noblewoman to the Queen of England, followed by her shocking fall and execution, has inspired centuries of fascination, debate, and myth-making. But beyond the dramatic events of her life, it is her letters, those intimate fragments of thought and feeling, that continue to grip historians and readers alike. These writings, sparse in number but dense with meaning, serve as windows into her world, her ambitions, her fears, and perhaps even her soul. Anne Boleyn's letters are more than just pieces of personal correspondence. They are testaments to a woman who lived at the very epicenter of a political and religious revolution. England in the early 16th century was a kingdom poised on the edge of seismic change. The Reformation was reshaping the spiritual identity of Europe, and Anne stood not just beside but arguably ahead of her husband in championing reformist ideas. The possibility that her own hand-penned lines filled with subtle political implication or fervent religious devotion adds layers of complexity to her already enigmatic character. These letters, however, are not simply admired for their historical context. They are treasured for their ability to humanize Anne. In an era where much of the record is written by her enemies, her own voice, captured on paper, offers rare glimpses of vulnerability, intelligence, and resilience. Whether addressing Henry VIII with wit and charm or issuing careful words to family and court officials, her language carries a distinctive sharpness and confidence. It's in these details, the choice of phrase, the turn of a sentence, that historians seek the true and hidden beneath layers of propaganda, legend, and retrospective judgment. And yet, these documents present an immediate challenge. How much of what we attribute to Anne Boleyn is truly hers? The authenticity of several of her surviving letters is hotly debated. Some have been preserved in copies or transcriptions made long after her death, while others exist only in references or mentions in third-party documents. This has led to disputes among scholars over handwriting, wording, and origin. The so-called Tower Letter, allegedly written by Anne to Henry from her prison cell before execution, is perhaps the most contested of all. Some claim it bears all the hallmarks of her intellect and emotional nuance, while others insist it was a forgery, perhaps written by a sympathetic courtier or even fabricated posthumously for political effect. Such uncertainty does not diminish interest in the letters. In fact, it enhances it. The questions surrounding them invite deeper analysis, drawing both academic experts and curious readers into a kind of historical detective story. Who really wrote them? What was the intended message? Can a single adjective or metaphor unlock new understanding of Anne's psychological state or strategic intent? These are the questions that make the letters not just artifacts, but living documents, tools for investigation and interpretation that remain as potent today as they were half a millennium ago. The very act of reading Anne Boleyn's letters feels intimate. There's a strange dissonance in holding a typed or digitized copy of a message that was originally penned in a flickering candlelight, perhaps in the early morning before court duties, or late at night while imprisoned in the Tower. That dissonance gives the letters a rawness and immediacy, making the past feel close, almost touchable. In an age of instant communication, Anne's careful, often artfully composed messages remind us of the gravity words once carried. How letters could woo kings, sway policies, or, in her case, perhaps even plead for life. The mystique of Anne Boleyn's letters also lies in their contrast to the ways she has been portrayed historically. For centuries, she was painted either as a scheming seductress or a tragic heroine. Her letters disrupt these binaries. They offer moments of humor, intellectual vigor, strategic awareness, and even tenderness. They do not fit neatly into one narrative or another, forcing readers to confront the complexity of a woman navigating one of the most treacherous courts in European history. The cultural and symbolic weight of these letters extends beyond Anne herself. They represent a rare form of female expression in a time when women's voices were often excluded from the official record. That these writings have survived at all, given the attempts to erase or tarnish Anne's legacy after her fall, is remarkable. They are testimonies not only to her individual experience but also to the broader struggle for women's agency and historical presence. Each letter challenges the silence imposed by power structures of the time. What makes these documents even more compelling is their unfinished nature. There are gaps, lost letters, missing replies. Historians often have only one side of a correspondence, leading to speculation about what was said in return, what remained unsaid, and what secrets the letters still keep. This absence creates a magnetic space for inquiry. It invites imagination but also caution. Interpreters must tread carefully between evidence and desire. The fascination with Anne Boleyn's letters is not just about who she was or what she said. It's about the interplay between text and context, fact and fiction, presence and absence. These letters serve as historical whispers, faint but resilient. They resist full comprehension yet persist in their emotional and intellectual pull. In them lies the drama of Tudor politics, the ache of personal longing, and the strategic maneuvering of a woman who dared to shape her destiny. Whether authentic or disputed, preserved or lost, Anne Boleyn's letters endure as some of the most compelling remnants of one of history's most enigmatic figures. Anne Boleyn's life, though tragically short, left a profound mark on English history. She emerged from the fringes of the English nobility to become Queen of England, mother to Elizabeth I, and a central figure in one of the most dramatic political and religious upheavals of the 16th century. Understanding her letters and the layers of personal and political meaning they carry requires a strong grasp of the world she inhabited, the forces that shaped her, and the consequences of her unprecedented rise and fall. Born sometime around 1501, Anne Boleyn was the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, a skilled diplomat and courtier, and Lady Elizabeth Howard, a member of one of England's oldest noble families. The Boleyns were ambitious and well-connected, though not among the highest aristocracy. Anne's upbringing was sophisticated by the standards of the time. She spent much of her early youth abroad, first in the Netherlands at the court of Margaret of Austria, and later in France where she served Queen Claude. These formative years in continental courts exposed her to the intellectual currents of the Renaissance, refined her manners and helped her master French, music, dance, and the intricacies of courtly diplomacy. She returned to England in the early 1520s as an elegant, multilingual, and unusually educated young woman. Anne's reintroduction into English court life coincided with one of the most politically charged periods in Tudor history. She quickly attracted attention for her wit, charm, and striking features. Unlike the conventional image of pale, golden-haired beauty idealized at the time, Anne was dark-haired and olive-skinned, often described as having a magnetic but unconventional allure. It wasn't long before she caught the eye of King Henry VIII. Henry VIII, by this time married to Catherine of Aragon for over a decade, had no surviving male heir, only a daughter, Mary. Obsessed with the need to secure the Tudor dynasty, Henry began to entertain the idea of annulling his marriage. His interest in and provided both the catalyst and the excuse for a dramatic break with the Roman Catholic Church. Anne, for her part, refused to become the king's mistress. This resistance only inflamed Henry's desire, and he began a determined campaign to win her as his queen. For nearly 7 years, Henry and his advisors worked to secure an annulment from Catherine. The Pope, under political pressure from Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V, refused to grant it. Frustrated, Henry began taking radical steps. In 1533 he broke with Rome, declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, and married Anne in a secret ceremony. She was crowned queen in June of that year, already pregnant with what Henry hoped would be his long-awaited son. The child, born in September, was a girl, Elizabeth. Though deeply disappointed, Henry remained committed to Anne for a time. But the pressures of the court, the volatile politics of religious reform, and Anne's failure to produce a male heir began to strain their relationship. Anne's assertive nature, once so attractive to Henry, began to alienate him. She had few powerful allies at court, and her enemies, many of whom had supported Catherine of Aragon, were waiting for the moment to bring her down. Anne's fall was as swift as her rise. In 1536, following several miscarriages, her political position became increasingly precarious. That same year, Henry had a serious jousting accident that left him physically diminished and possibly contributed to his mood swings and impatience. Anne's inability to bear him a son was now viewed not just as a personal disappointment but a political liability. In a matter of months, accusations began to swirl: adultery, incest, conspiracy to kill the king. These charges were shocking and almost certainly fabricated, but in the absolute monarchy of Tudor England, the truth mattered less than the king's will. Anne was arrested in May 1536 and taken to the Tower of London. Despite defending herself vigorously in court, she was found guilty along with several men, one of them her own brother George Boleyn, accused of being her lovers and accomplices. The trial was a spectacle of injustice. Within days all were executed. On May 19, Anne Boleyn was beheaded by a French swordsman, an execution granted as a mercy by Henry. She died with dignity, delivering a speech that avoided blame and accepted her fate with calm resolution. She was just about 35 years old. The events of Anne's life were inseparable from the broader political and religious context of the time. The early 16th century was a period of tremendous turmoil in Europe. The Protestant Reformation, sparked by Martin Luther's theses in 1517, had already begun to challenge the authority of the Catholic Church. England, like much of Europe, was a deeply Catholic nation, but dissatisfaction with the Church was growing, fueled by resentment of papal authority, corruption among clergy, and calls for reform. Henry VIII was not initially sympathetic to Protestantism. He had even written a treatise defending Catholic doctrine that earned him the title Defender of the Faith from the Pope. But his personal desires eventually aligned with religious reform. When the Church refused to annul his marriage to Catherine, he declared spiritual independence from Rome. This break led to the creation of the Church of England, a national church under royal authority. While the early English Reformation was primarily a political movement, it had profound religious consequences. Monasteries were dissolved, church lands confiscated, and traditional religious practices disrupted. Anne Boleyn was viewed by many contemporaries as a key influence in this transition. She supported the distribution of English-language Bibles, corresponded with reformers, and advocated for clerics with Protestant leanings. Whether she was a genuine reformer or merely a political facilitator remains a subject of debate, but her role in the religious shift was undeniable. The court of Henry VIII, meanwhile, was a complex and dangerous arena. Loyalties shifted constantly, and the king's favor could elevate or destroy careers overnight. Anne's ascendancy displaced many powerful allies of Catherine, creating long-lasting enmity. Her boldness, intelligence, and political engagement were threatening in a culture where women were expected to be submissive. Her rise challenged not just a queen's place at court, but the entire social order of the Tudor monarchy. After her death, efforts were made to erase Anne's legacy. Her coat of arms was torn down, her images removed, and her name spoken in hushed tones. Yet she was not forgotten. Her daughter, Elizabeth, would later ascend to the throne and become one of the most celebrated monarchs in English history. Elizabeth rarely spoke of her mother in public, but subtle gestures, her choice of loyal advisors from the Boleyn side, her use of symbolism associated with Anne, suggested a deep, if quiet, reverence. And Boleyn's story has remained compelling because it defies simple categorization. She was neither merely a victim nor purely a villain. She was a woman who played the game of power in a male-dominated world and lost. But in doing so, she irrevocably altered the course of English history. Her letters, written during times of triumph and despair, offer a lens through which we can understand this world. The ambition that drove her, the intellect that distinguished her, and the vulnerability that ultimately made her human. To appreciate the full depth of her correspondence, one must first see the world she navigated, its dangers, its transformations, and the unique position she held within it. Anne Boleyn's letters are among the most tantalizing remnants of her brief but consequential life. Though relatively few in number, they provide essential clues about her character, her political acumen, her emotional world, and the courtly culture that surrounded her. These letters are not merely personal communications. They are historical documents that have helped shape our understanding of one of England's most enigmatic queens. Because of the limited number of texts confidently attributed to her, each letter takes on outsized significance and is examined with immense care and scrutiny. Roughly a dozen letters are directly or plausibly attributed to Anne Boleyn. These include love letters believed to have been written to King Henry VIII before their marriage, formal correspondence with ambassadors and court officials, and most famously the letter allegedly penned while Anne was imprisoned in the Tower of London shortly before her execution. The content of these writings varies widely, from expressions of affection and loyalty to Henry, to thoughtful and carefully worded exchanges on matters of courtly or diplomatic concern. Their tone and intention shift depending on the context in which they were written. Some are intimate and emotional, others strategic and detached, reflecting Anne's skill in navigating the shifting tides of Tudor politics. Most of the letters that survive are preserved in copies or transcriptions, not in Anne's original hand. This makes verifying their authenticity especially complex. A few letters exist as 16th-century manuscript copies, while others were recorded in later compilations of historical documents. Some were included in ambassadorial dispatches, referenced by contemporary observers, or archived in collections gathered by scholars and antiquarians centuries later. Because the originals have been lost, or may never have existed in written form, historians rely heavily on context, language, and circumstantial evidence to determine whether a letter can be reliably attributed to Anne. The most famous letter connected to her is often referred to as the Tower Letter, supposedly written by Anne to Henry VIII in May 1536 while she awaited execution. In this letter she pleads her innocence and expresses sorrow over her fall from grace. It contains impassioned and dignified language, evoking both her personal despair and her enduring love for Henry. However, its authorship is deeply contested. Some scholars argue that it reflects Anne's voice and rhetorical style, while others believe it was written by a sympathetic courtier or fabricated entirely for political or emotional effect. The language of the letter, while poetic and powerful, does not conclusively align with other confirmed examples of Anne's correspondence, adding further ambiguity to its provenance. The physical locations of these surviving letters and transcriptions are scattered across several institutions and private collections. Some of the most important materials can be found in the British Library, one of the world's foremost repositories of Tudor-era documents. The Vatican Library also houses records connected to Anne, primarily in the form of ambassadorial dispatches and papal correspondence that mention her or were copied from original texts. In addition, private archives and historical societies in the United Kingdom and continental Europe contain transcriptions, marginal notes, and references to letters believed to be from Anne or about her. The dispersed nature of the documentation complicates efforts to assemble a complete picture of her written legacy. Authentication of Anne Boleyn's letters is a rigorous and often speculative process. Historians employ a number of techniques to assess whether a given letter was likely written by Anne herself. These include paleographic analysis, which examines handwriting, spelling conventions, and syntax common in the Tudor period. When original manuscripts are not available, researchers analyze the style, tone, and vocabulary of the letter, comparing it with known aspects of Anne's life, personality, and education. For instance, Anne's familiarity with French, her rhetorical flair, and her religious inclinations often surface in the letters, providing clues that point toward or away from her authorship. Another important factor in authentication is context. Scholars examine the dates, circumstances, and subjects discussed in the letters to determine whether Anne had the motive, means, and opportunity to write them. If a letter refers to a specific court event, political negotiation, or private moment, researchers cross-reference it with known historical records. If the content aligns plausibly with Anne's life and known activities at that time, the letter gains credibility. If inconsistencies arise, doubts emerge. Some letters are more easily authenticated because they appear in multiple independent sources. For example, several of Anne's love letters to Henry are preserved in Vatican archives, ironically in the very institution that denied Henry's annulment from Catherine of Aragon. These letters were likely intercepted or copied by agents of the Catholic Church as part of the broader intelligence-gathering effort during the king's controversial divorce proceedings. Their existence in Vatican documents lends them a degree of credibility, though it also raises questions about whether the originals were edited or altered by intermediaries with political motivations. Complicating matters further is the existence of forgeries and romanticized recreations. The Victorian era in particular saw a surge of interest in Anne Boleyn, and with it came a proliferation of fictionalized accounts, embellished biographies and fabricated letters meant to add emotional drama to her story. Even some respected historians of earlier centuries relied on questionable sources or unverified texts. As a result, modern scholars must be constantly vigilant in distinguishing authentic records from later inventions or literary imitations. Despite these challenges, the letters associated with Anne Boleyn continue to be studied, debated, and reinterpreted. They remain vital tools in understanding the political drama of Henry VIII's court, the dynamics of royal intimacy, and the personal cost of ambition in an age when the stakes for women were often life or death. Each letter, authentic or suspect, carries the weight of centuries of fascination. They are read not only as historical documents but as emotional artifacts that bridge the past and present. The survival of even a few lines attributed to and speaks volumes about the power of the written word and the enduring legacy of a woman who defied the expectations of her time. Whether whispering love, asserting political will, or offering a final, dignified protest, Anne's letters, real or rumored, invite us to listen closely, question deeply, and understand more fully the remarkable life she lived and the turbulent world she inhabited. Anne Boleyn's letters, though few in number and often contested in authorship, have captivated historians and readers alike for the ways they reveal, or seem to conceal, deep personal convictions, calculated political maneuvering, and coded expressions of emotion and belief. Within the layered prose of her surviving or attributed writings, scholars have long noted the presence of veiled messages, religious symbolism, and rhetorical artistry that reflect both her intelligence and the treacherous landscape she navigated. To understand the hidden depths of Anne's correspondence is to engage with the language of a woman who lived at the heart of a turbulent court, surrounded by ambition, betrayal, and shifting religious tides. Her words, composed during moments of both triumph and despair, often speak as much through their silences and allusions as through their overt content. One of the most pervasive and revealing aspects of Anne's writing is her use of religious symbolism. Her faith was not just a private matter. It was woven into her public identity, her political significance, and even her downfall. Though she is often remembered for catalyzing Henry VIII's break with the Roman Catholic Church, and herself was no radical reformer in the early stages of her rise. However, she did demonstrate a profound interest in the theological debates of the time, particularly those emphasizing personal piety, scriptural literacy, and the questioning of papal authority. In her letters, religious references often serve multiple purposes. On the surface, they express conventional Christian devotion, appeals to God's mercy, invocations of divine justice, or humble professions of faith. But beneath these outward expressions lie more subtle currents. When Anne writes of Christ's suffering or the sanctity of conscience, she is often asserting a parallel between her own trials and those of biblical figures. This was particularly evident in the letter supposedly written from the Tower of London before her execution, where she reflects on injustice and divine truth. Whether or not the letter was penned by her own hand, its theological framing mirrors the kind of martyr-like image that reformist writers would later associate with and after her death. In passages like these, references to God, virtue, and eternal truth become more than pious sentiment. They are rhetorical shields and sometimes quiet acts of resistance. This interweaving of religion and rhetoric is further complicated by the suggestion, held by some scholars, that Anne may have employed secret codes or hidden meanings in her writings. Tudor court life was saturated with suspicion and surveillance. Letters were routinely intercepted, read by unintended audiences, and used as evidence in political intrigues. In such an environment, those writing from or to the center of power had to be shrewd in their use of language. Messages had to be crafted to communicate one meaning to the intended reader, while obscuring or masking sensitive content from prying eyes. Although there is no concrete evidence of and using formal cipher systems like those employed in espionage, her letters show signs of encoded communication through metaphor, allusion, and ambiguous phrasing. A seemingly innocuous phrase might carry weightier connotations for a recipient familiar with her circumstances or prior correspondence. Phrases invoking truth, honor, or mercy could, depending on context, allude to loyalty, betrayal, or pleas for clemency. This is particularly true of the letters she may have written during her imprisonment, where her language is restrained yet laced with emotional and moral appeal, suggesting layered meanings designed to resonate on both a personal and political level. One of the more compelling instances of suspected symbolic expression is the reference to a constant heart in correspondence to Henry. On the surface, such language reflects romantic loyalty. Yet in the fraught climate of the Tudor court, constancy might also be a subtle assertion of innocence, a quiet rebuke of accusations, or a theological allusion to divine truth unshaken by earthly corruption. By cloaking serious emotional and political themes in the language of fidelity and virtue, and maintained plausible deniability while still speaking powerfully to those who understood the coded implications of her words. Rhetorical strategy was one of Anne Boleyn's most distinctive strengths, and her letters reflect a highly developed capacity for persuasion. Her writing often demonstrates a clear awareness of the power dynamics at play, adjusting her tone and argumentation to suit the recipient and the political context. To Henry, she was often deferential but never groveling, expressing loyalty and affection without diminishing her dignity. This careful balance distinguished her from the typical courtly mistress and likely contributed to the intensity of Henry's pursuit. Her letters to other figures, diplomats, courtiers, or foreign monarchs, tend to be composed in formal, calculated language, projecting authority and refinement while avoiding unnecessary personal exposure. Anne's persuasive techniques include appeals to shared values, calculated humility, and indirect requests couched in expressions of gratitude or obedience. When she sought a favor or defended herself, she rarely made outright demands. Instead, she framed her requests as matters of justice, honor, or the king's magnanimity. This allowed her to present herself not as a petitioner seeking personal gain but as a virtuous woman upholding moral or divine principles. In the hierarchical world of Tudor politics, such framing was not just elegant, it was essential to survival. Perhaps most haunting is the way Anne used courtly language to veil deep personal emotions. The etiquette of Tudor correspondence demanded decorum, particularly from women, and overt displays of anger, fear, or desperation could be dangerous. Yet even within these constraints, Anne found ways to express herself. Her letters often convey sorrow, frustration, hope, or indignation, but they do so within the stylized, almost ritualistic conventions of elite communication. Emotional truth is not shouted. It is whispered beneath layers of politeness and metaphor. In this way, Anne's writing can be seen as a performance, one that mirrored her public persona. Her courtly training in France had instilled in her the art of using language as a form of self-presentation. A single turn of phrase, a rhetorical flourish, or a well-timed compliment could speak volumes. Even in her darkest hours, she maintained this composure. The famous Tower Letter, if indeed hers, is a masterclass in dignified grief. It neither begs for mercy nor directly condemns her accusers, yet it conveys a profound sense of betrayal and quiet strength. Her use of phrases like "the least regard of me, your most faithful wife," cuts through the formal tone with devastating emotional weight, reminding the reader of both her vulnerability and her unwavering identity. Underlying all of this is the sense that Anne Boleyn wrote with the knowledge that her words could be preserved, scrutinized, and judged, not just by her contemporaries but by posterity. Whether consciously or not, she seemed to understand that her letters might outlive her and form part of her legacy. That legacy, as it happens, has been shaped in part by how modern historians interpret and reinterpret these writings. In the absence of extensive documentation, each surviving letter becomes a site of intense scholarly inquiry, with experts dissecting every phrase for meaning, motive, and authenticity. The ambiguities in Anne's letters, what is said and what is left unsaid, are what make them so compelling. Her writing reflects a mind trained to balance sincerity with self-preservation, affection with caution, and faith with pragmatism. It reveals a woman who was deeply aware of the power of words in a world where speech could elevate or destroy, where a well-crafted sentence might earn a crown or seal a fate. In the shadow of betrayal and death, Anne's words endure not just as relics, but as echoes of a complex, courageous voice navigating the perilous terrain of Tudor politics and courtly love. These layers of symbolism, rhetorical finesse, and emotional restraint suggest that Anne Boleyn did not simply write to communicate, she wrote to survive, to persuade, to endure. Her letters, enigmatic and eloquent, reflect a woman who wielded language as both shield and sword. For historians, they remain an invitation to listen closely, to read between the lines, and to uncover the many truths concealed within her carefully chosen words. The love letters exchanged between Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII offer one of the most intimate glimpses into the early dynamics of a relationship that would come to reshape English history. These letters, especially those preserved in the Vatican archives, capture a moment when Anne, not yet queen, held remarkable influence over a powerful monarch through her words alone. They are rich in tone, emotion, and layered with calculated nuance. For a woman at court in a time when romantic correspondence was as much about positioning as it was about affection, Anne's letters exhibit an extraordinary blend of charm, restraint, and strategy. The tone of these letters is carefully measured. While Anne's responses to Henry's passion are often gracious and affectionate, they are rarely impulsive or overly sentimental. Instead, they reflect a woman acutely aware of her position and the risks involved in engaging too openly with a king who was still married to another woman. Her voice is not submissive or overwhelmed. Rather, it is composed, articulate, and occasionally even teasing. The emotional current in these letters flows subtly, through implication, courtesy, and wit. It is not the tone of a woman swept away by love alone. It is the voice of someone navigating a delicate, high-stakes courtship with clear purpose and emotional intelligence. This balance of emotion and control speaks volumes about the early stages of Anne and Henry's relationship. Contrary to later depictions that cast her either as a scheming temptress or a helpless victim, the letters reveal a more complex portrait. And as a participant in a romantic and political entanglement she both encouraged and managed. In several letters, her language reveals both an awareness of Henry's growing obsession and a strategic patience with his pursuit. Rather than throwing herself at the king, Anne withheld physical intimacy, asserting a kind of conditional availability that only deepened Henry's desire. This withholding was not simply about preserving her virtue. It was a calculated assertion of agency. By maintaining boundaries, Anne positioned herself not merely as a lover, but as a potential wife. A partner worthy of royal marriage, not just courtly dalliance. Henry's letters, in contrast, are often effusive, passionate, and occasionally impatient. They underscore the imbalance of power in their relationship. He was king after all, but they also reveal the emotional leverage Anne managed to hold. Henry frequently expresses longing and frustration at her absence, assuring her of his love and desire. His vulnerability in these writings highlights the effectiveness of Anne's restraint. Far from being dominated by Henry, she exercised considerable influence by controlling access to herself, both emotionally and physically. Anne's emotional intelligence is especially apparent in her ability to mirror Henry's affection without compromising her self-respect. She never flatters excessively, nor does she beg for his attention. Her affection is implied in her careful phrasing, in her concern for his well-being, and in her responses to his gifts or words. She understood the psychological mechanics of desire and deployed them masterfully, not through manipulation in the vulgar sense, but through a sophisticated dance of attraction, distance, and delayed gratification. In a court where women were often pawns, Anne crafted a position of extraordinary power simply by knowing when and how to respond. These letters also reflect the larger dynamics of Tudor politics and the gendered expectations of royal courtship. Loyalty, love, and ambition were intertwined in ways that defy modern romantic conventions. When Anne wrote of devotion or obedience, these were not just emotional declarations, they were political statements. She was pledging allegiance to a king whose decisions could secure or destroy her family's future. Yet embedded in these expressions of loyalty is the ambition of a woman who saw herself not merely as a mistress or companion, but as someone who could redefine the queen's role itself. Indeed, when Anne hinted at her exclusivity or worthiness, she was subtly making the case for marriage, not just for love but as a legitimate path to power. Her ambition was not hidden behind coyness. Rather, it was laced into every courteous refusal and every elegant delay. She offered not only herself, but the promise of an alliance that could legitimize Henry's desires and solve his dynastic concerns. Her ability to suggest this without ever appearing presumptuous is perhaps her greatest rhetorical triumph. In reading these letters, it's essential to remember that every word Anne wrote had to pass through a mental filter sharpened by court life. A woman in her position could not afford to be reckless. Even private letters might be intercepted, gossiped about, or used against her. Thus, every line carries the weight of dual meaning. A phrase like "your humble servant" might, on one level, denote submission. On another, It might subtly remind Henry of her social inferiority, and thus her unattainability, while simultaneously reinforcing her controlled posture. When she writes of longing, it is rarely desperate. When she speaks of honor, it is a reminder that she will not yield easily. This discipline of language is the key to understanding Anne's emotional world, never fully open yet never entirely closed. What further complicates the interpretation of these letters is how much they reveal about Henry's growing dependence on Anne, and how skillfully she managed that imbalance. Over time, the dynamic between them shifted. Henry's language became increasingly intense, his frustration at their separation more acute. And while still affectionate, remained measured. This is not to say she did not feel love for Henry. Indeed, their eventual union and her willingness to risk everything suggest strong emotional ties. But she always conveyed her emotions with a caution born from both personal experience and political calculation. The emotional landscape of these letters, then, is rich with veiled meanings. When Anne praises Henry's great kindness, she is acknowledging his favor without surrendering too much of herself. When she thanks him for a jewel or a letter, she is participating in the rituals of courtly love while maintaining her distance. Her words carry warmth but also self-possession. Love in these letters is never simple. It is entangled with fear, hope, and ambition, all written in the stylized language of court romance. This stylization was not accidental. In Tudor England, love letters were performative acts, shaped by literary conventions and social expectations. Anne was well read, especially in French court literature, and would have been familiar with the language of chivalry, honor, and devotion. Her letters reflect this influence. They are not the spontaneous outpourings of a lovesick girl. They are crafted with a poet's eye and a diplomat's care. Through metaphor and controlled emotional tone, she constructed a persona that was alluring, virtuous, and indispensable. Yet beneath the polish, there are moments where genuine emotion seems to flicker through. In some letters, there is a sense of guarded excitement, perhaps even pride at Henry's continued devotion. In others, subtle hints of worry or anxiety peek through. Concerns about reputation, about the Queen's jealousy, about the risks of being too visible too soon. These glimpses of vulnerability make her writings all the more human. She was not only a strategist but a woman entangled in a dangerous love, striving to protect herself while reaching for something greater. Loyalty is another theme woven tightly into these letters. Anne repeatedly affirms her fidelity, not just to Henry as a man, but to his vision of the future. In doing so, she lays the groundwork for the idea that she, not Catherine, is the rightful partner to the king's destiny. Her loyalty is never transactional. It is portrayed as moral, rooted in truth and divine purpose. This framing allows her to elevate her position beyond that of a rival or lover. She is not merely Henry's companion. She becomes the woman chosen by fate, aligned with divine will and capable of supporting his quest for a legitimate heir. Love, too, is framed in elevated terms. It is not merely physical or romantic. It is transformative. Through their bond, Anne and Henry envisioned a new future, free from papal control, from the limitations of a barren marriage, from the old order. This vision, however flawed or self-serving, gave their correspondence a sense of shared mission. In this way, Anne's letters reveal not just the contours of a personal relationship, but the foundation of a political revolution. Her ambition was never hidden. It was expressed through affection, loyalty, and the dream of becoming more than mistress, becoming queen. Ambition, however, remains the most contested thread in the interpretation of these letters. Was Anne calculating and self-serving, or simply a woman surviving and thriving in a system designed to limit her? Her letters offer no easy answers. They show a woman who knew the value of restraint, who understood the stakes of intimacy, and who mastered the art of emotional diplomacy. Whether she wrote out of love, strategy, or both, Anne's letters make clear that she never underestimated the power of words, or the peril of their misuse. The love letters between Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII are not just romantic relics. They are acts of persuasion, artifacts of political theater, and expressions of individual agency in a world where women's voices were often silenced. Through them, Anne emerges not as a pawn, but as a player, skilled, complex, and unforgettable. Her words continue to echo across the centuries, reminding us that love in the hands of someone like Anne Boleyn was never a simple matter of the heart. It was a battlefield, a negotiation, and perhaps a kind of revolution. The writings attributed to Anne Boleyn during her imprisonment in the Tower of London, especially the so-called Tower Letter, stand as some of the most poignant and enigmatic documents associated with her life. These letters, composed in the shadow of her imminent execution, have been studied intensely for what they reveal about her state of mind, her sense of injustice, and her attempt to assert control in a moment when all worldly power was slipping away. The Tower Letter, in particular, occupies a unique place in Tudor history and literature, not only because of the dramatic circumstances of its creation but also because it embodies the tensions between personal expression, political necessity, and historical memory. The Tower Letter is said to have been written by Anne in the weeks or days before her execution in May 1536. Addressed to Henry VIII, the letter is at once a personal appeal, a statement of innocence, and a subtle political document. Its tone and content have provoked intense debate among historians and literary scholars alike. On the surface, the letter reads as a moving testament of a woman wronged, a queen who pleads for justice, professes unwavering loyalty, and expresses deep sorrow over the rupture of her relationship with the king. However, beneath this apparent simplicity lies a complex interplay of emotions and rhetorical strategies that complicate any straightforward reading. One of the foremost controversies surrounding the Tower Letter is its authenticity. Unlike other letters attributed to Anne, this particular document does not survive in her own handwriting, and its provenance is murky. Some versions of the letter come from later copies or are known through transcripts made by secretaries or sympathizers after her death. Because of these uncertainties, historians have questioned whether Anne truly penned the letter herself, whether it was dictated, or whether it was a later construction designed to shape her legacy. This debate touches on larger issues of textual authority and historical narrative. If the letter is not Anne's authentic voice, then what does it signify? If it is genuine, what can it tell us about her final moments? The question of authenticity has not led to a consensus. Some scholars argue that the letter's intimate tone and specific details suggest a first-hand composition by Anne. The emotional depth and subtlety of its language, they contend, would be difficult to replicate by anyone else. Others point to inconsistencies in style or the presence of anachronistic phrases as evidence of later editing or forgery. Regardless of authorship, the letter remains one of the most powerful windows into the emotional and political climate surrounding Anne's downfall. In examining the tone of the Tower Letter, it becomes clear that it is not a simple outpouring of despair. While sorrow and fear are certainly present, they are tempered by an undercurrent of hope, defiance, and calculated appeal. Anne does not present herself as a broken woman begging for mercy. Instead, she carefully constructs an image of innocence and virtue, framing herself as a martyr unjustly condemned. This rhetorical strategy serves multiple functions. It appeals to Henry's conscience, it invites sympathy from posterity, and it asserts Anne's own dignity even as her world collapses. The letter's tone also conveys a nuanced emotional landscape that shifts between resignation and resistance, and acknowledges the harshness of her fate and the suffering she endures but simultaneously insists on the truth of her character. She evokes her past loyalty to Henry and the sincerity of her love, emphasizing that her downfall results from false accusations and court intrigues rather than any moral failing on her part. This insistence on innocence is a key theme, repeated throughout the letter, and it resonates with the broader narrative of her life as seen through the lens of history and legend. Political maneuvering is woven subtly throughout the letter. Though Anne's position in the Tower was desperate, she uses the letter to influence how she will be remembered and to shape Henry's response. She appeals to the king's sense of justice and piety, reminding him of their shared past and the promises once made. These appeals are not naive. They recognize Henry's complex motivations and the political pressures that led to her arrest. Anne's words function as a final effort to reclaim agency, an attempt to speak truth to power even in captivity. Symbolism plays a central role in the Tower Letter, and employs religious imagery and references to innocence and martyrdom to position herself within a narrative of suffering and redemption. She draws parallels between her own situation and biblical figures who endured unjust persecution, implicitly likening herself to a Christ-like figure or a saint wronged by earthly authorities. These symbolic references serve to elevate her plight beyond the personal and political to a realm of moral and spiritual significance. This martyrdom motif also reflects the broader religious upheaval of the period. Anne's association with the Protestant Reformation, though complex, influenced how she was viewed after her death, both by supporters who cast her as a heroine of reform and detractors who painted her as a sinner. The letter's language fits within this context, as it speaks to ideas of truth, conscience, and divine justice that were central to Reformation thought. In this way, the letter becomes more than a personal document. It transforms into a text that participates in ongoing religious and ideological debates. Moreover, the letter's symbolic content extends to its evocation of innocence. Anne repeatedly denies any guilt, positioning herself as the victim of false charges and corruption. This insistence on innocence is crucial because it challenges the official narrative that justified her execution for adultery and treason. By asserting her purity and moral rectitude, Anne uses the letter to contest the legitimacy of her condemnation and to appeal to a higher authority than that of the Tudor court. The Tower letter's language also reveals Anne's awareness of her legacy. Even as she faces death, she seems conscious of how her words will be received by future generations. This self-awareness adds a layer of poignancy and complexity to the letter. Anne's writing is not merely a private expression of grief. It is a crafted testament designed to endure. It speaks across time, inviting readers to question the official version of events and to see her as more than a tragic figure caught in court politics. In addition to its emotional and symbolic richness, the letter is a remarkable example of political rhetoric. Anne's use of language carefully balances humility with assertion, pleading with authority while maintaining dignity. She neither fully submits nor openly rebels but occupies a liminal space where survival depends on the power of words. This rhetorical balance is a testament to Anne's intelligence and education, as well as her understanding of the precariousness of her situation. The letter's format and style also reflect the conventions of Tudor correspondence, where personal sentiment was often expressed through formalized and coded language. Anne's choice of words, the structure of her sentences, and the allusions she makes all conform to the expectations of her time, yet they also allow for multiple interpretations. Readers sensitive to this complexity can discern layers of meaning that reveal Anne's inner turmoil, strategic thinking, and spiritual reflection. Beyond the letter itself, the broader context of Anne's final days enriches the interpretation of these writings. Imprisoned in the Tower under charges widely believed to be fabricated, Anne faced a court that had turned decisively against her. The political machinations that led to her arrest involved powerful figures who saw her removal as necessary to secure their own positions. Against this backdrop, her letters stand as acts of defiance and self-assertion. They are the voice of a woman confronting injustice and mortality with courage and eloquence. The contrast between the harsh reality of Anne's imprisonment and the dignity of her written words enhances their emotional impact. While her body was confined and condemned, her voice in the letters remains free, asserting identity, defending honor, and reaching out to the king and to history itself. This contrast is a key reason why the Tower letter, whether authentic or not, continues to resonate deeply with readers and historians. The letter also invites reflection on the nature of power and vulnerability. Anne's predicament illustrates how quickly fortunes could change in Tudor England, and how precarious even queenship could be. Yet through her writing, Anne transforms vulnerability into strength. The letter is not merely a record of despair but a deliberate exercise of influence, using words as a means of resistance when all other options were closed. Moreover, the letter's lasting legacy can be seen in how it has shaped cultural and historical perceptions of Anne Boleyn. It has been used to evoke sympathy, to highlight injustice, and to underscore the tragedy of her life and death. In literature, drama, and popular history, the letter functions as a symbol of Anne's voice transcending the silencing of execution, a testament to her enduring presence. The Tower letter and other writings from Anne's final days encapsulate a complex mixture of emotions, political calculation, and symbolic power. Whether written by her hand or crafted by others, these documents provide a crucial insight into the psychology of a woman caught between love and betrayal, life and death, loyalty and accusation. They reveal Anne not only as a historical figure but as a thinker and writer who grappled with the deepest questions of justice, identity, and faith in the face of overwhelming adversity. The letter's resonance lies in its ability to humanize Anne Boleyn while also situating her within the grander drama of Tudor politics and religious upheaval. It invites readers to listen beyond the official record and to consider the woman behind the queen, the individual whose words, carefully chosen and passionately felt, continue to speak across the centuries. Through these writings, Anne's final moments become not only a closing chapter of a tumultuous life but also an enduring testament to the power of language as survival and legacy. The letters Anne Boleyn sent to her family, allies, and even enemies provide a fascinating window into her complex social and political world, showcasing her skillful communication and subtle diplomacy in a highly volatile environment. These correspondences reveal how Anne maintained important relationships, managed political alliances and navigated rivalries with a mixture of tact, assertiveness, and sometimes a deftly veiled hostility. They expose not only her personal connections but also her acute awareness of the power dynamics at play within Henry VIII's court and beyond. Her letters to family members, most notably to her father Thomas Boleyn, Earl of Wiltshire, and her brother George Boleyn, were often intimate and strategic at once. Though they reflect the emotional bonds typical of family correspondence, they also betray a calculated use of familial ties to strengthen political influence. Anne's communication with her father and brother was not limited to personal affection or familial duty. It was a means of coordinating efforts to maintain their standing at court and protect the Boleyn family's rising fortunes. The tone in these letters balances warmth with clear expectations, often reflecting Anne's role as a guiding and commanding figure within the family network. Anne's exchanges with her father were crucial during critical moments, especially as tensions grew at court. In her letters, she sought to keep him informed, to encourage prudence, and to reassure him when political pressures mounted. Her relationship with George, likewise, was marked by a blend of camaraderie and shared political ambition. Their correspondence reveals a partnership forged in the turbulent political arena, where loyalty and discretion were paramount. The letters between Anne and George sometimes discuss court intrigues and strategies, highlighting the family's unified front in pursuing their interests and responding to threats. Beyond her family, Anne engaged in diplomatic correspondence with influential figures such as Thomas Cromwell, Henry VIII's chief minister, and foreign ambassadors representing various European powers. These letters, while less personal, are no less significant. They illustrate Anne's understanding of the broader political landscape and her ability to operate within it effectively. Through these communications, she sought to cultivate alliances, manage perceptions, and influence key decisions that impacted both her own position and England's diplomatic standing. Anne's correspondence with Cromwell in particular is instructive. As a powerful figure who could make or break careers, Cromwell was both an ally and a potential adversary. Anne's letters to him carefully balanced respect and persuasion, often framed in a tone designed to maintain goodwill while subtly asserting her influence. In these writings, Anne demonstrated a deftness in court diplomacy, acknowledging Cromwell's authority while reminding him of mutual interests and shared goals. Her language here is polished, strategic, and at times deliberately opaque, revealing her mastery of the coded communication that Tudor politics demanded. Letters to foreign ambassadors similarly reflect Anne's role in the international arena. Through her correspondence, she projected an image of England's royal court that was cultured, stable, and aligned with broader European concerns. These letters were part of the delicate dance of diplomacy, where words were weapons and shields, capable of forging alliances or igniting conflict. Anne's diplomatic language was often courteous yet firm, designed to uphold England's prestige and signal her own importance as the king's favored consort. One of the most intriguing aspects of Anne's letters to friends, allies, and enemies is the manner in which she practiced what could be described as passive-aggressive diplomacy. This indirect form of confrontation, emblematic of what some scholars call the Boleyn style, involved the use of suggestion, insinuation, and carefully veiled criticism rather than open hostility. In a court rife with spies, shifting alliances, and deadly rivalries, direct confrontation was often suicidal. Instead, Anne employed a subtler form of warfare through her letters, where sarcasm, irony, and polite but cutting remarks served to undermine opponents while maintaining plausible deniability. This passive-aggressive approach allowed Anne to strike at her enemies without risking overt conflict. For example, in letters where she addressed or alluded to rivals such as Queen Catherine of Aragon's supporters or members of conservative factions hostile to her reformist sympathies, and used language that appeared courteous but contained barbed undertones. This style of communication could sow doubt, spread rumors, or cast aspersions on others' loyalty or morality, all under the guise of civility. It was a form of psychological warfare, allowing Anne to maintain an upper hand in a dangerous environment. Such letters reveal Anne's political acumen and her awareness of the power of language as a tool of control and influence. They also expose the precariousness of her position, the need to defend herself and her family not through force, but through wit and rhetoric. In a world where women had limited formal power, Anne's letters became a vital arena where she could assert authority, protect her interests and combat adversaries. Moreover, this indirect mode of communication was shaped by the conventions of Tudor court culture, where etiquette and decorum constrained how openly conflicts could be expressed. Anne's skill lay in her ability to adhere to these social norms while still conveying messages that resonated beneath the surface. Her letters are rich with nuance and double meanings, requiring careful reading to grasp their full significance. This complexity made them powerful weapons, as they could influence opinions without provoking backlash. Anne's use of passive-aggressive diplomacy extended to her dealings with court factions and religious reformers as well. She was a known supporter of Protestant ideas, which alienated her from many traditionalists. Her letters to allies within the reform movement often carried coded messages of encouragement and solidarity, while her communications to opponents contained subtle warnings or critiques cloaked in politeness. This balancing act was essential to maintaining her influence and navigating the religious tensions that defined the era. The letters also illustrate how Anne's personal and political lives were deeply intertwined. Her correspondence was never purely private. It was always shaped by the demands of survival, ambition, and power. This blending of the personal and political is one reason why her letters remain such compelling historical documents. They provide insight into how one of Tudor England's most fascinating figures managed the competing demands of family loyalty, court intrigue, and international diplomacy. In some instances, Anne's letters to family members served as both comfort and counsel during moments of crisis. For example, during times when her position at court was threatened, she offered reassurance and instructions to her relatives, emphasizing the need for discretion and unity. These letters show Anne as both a protective sister and daughter, and a shrewd political actor aware that family solidarity could be a critical resource. Similarly, her letters to allies were often vehicles for negotiating favors, offering support or warning of impending dangers. Anne's ability to cultivate networks through correspondence highlights her role as a central figure in the intricate web of Tudor politics. These communications were essential to building trust and securing loyalty, which in turn strengthened her influence over the king and the direction of the court. At the same time, letters to enemies, or to those whose loyalty was suspect, demonstrate Anne's willingness to engage in subtle intimidation. Through pointed questions, ironic remarks, or references to past favors, she could remind adversaries of their obligations or expose their weaknesses without resorting to open confrontation. This indirect pressure was often more effective than blunt threats, as it operated within the accepted norms of courtly behavior while still delivering a clear message. The combined effect of Anne's letters to family, allies, and enemies was to create a dynamic system of communication that reinforced her power base. Through these writings, she managed perceptions, controlled information flows, and shaped alliances in ways that were critical to her rise and maintenance of influence. The letters reveal not only her intelligence and eloquence but also the precariousness of her position in a court where favor could shift suddenly and disastrously. Furthermore, the style and content of Anne's letters underscore the unique challenges faced by women in Tudor politics. Without formal authority, Anne had to rely on persuasion, indirect influence, and the cultivation of personal relationships to achieve her goals. Her letters are a testament to how women like her navigated these constraints, wielding soft power in an environment dominated by men and marked by suspicion and rivalry. Anne Boleyn's letters to her family, allies, and enemies constitute a remarkable body of work that illuminates her role as a political strategist and communicator. They reveal a woman who combined affection with ambition, tact with tenacity, and diplomacy with subtle aggression. Through these correspondences, and shaped her destiny and left a legacy of resilience and rhetorical skill that continues to captivate historians and readers alike. Anne Boleyn's education and court training played a crucial role in shaping her intellect, her confidence, and her distinctive approach to power and communication. Unlike many women of her time, Anne was not only literate but also highly educated, benefiting from exposure to some of the leading cultural and intellectual currents of the early 16th century. Her experiences in the courts of the Netherlands and France in particular deeply influenced her worldview and equipped her with the knowledge and skills that would distinguish her among the Tudor elite. During her youth Anne spent several years abroad in the Netherlands and France, environments that were hubs of Renaissance culture and learning. These courts were vibrant centers for art, literature, and political thought, where new ideas were circulating and the humanist movement was flourishing. Anne's time in these cosmopolitan settings allowed her to absorb the intellectual trends of the day, including the emphasis on classical learning, the study of languages, and the cultivation of rhetorical skills. This exposure not only broadened her horizons but also introduced her to the refined manners and courtly etiquette that would later become integral to her role in England. In the Netherlands, Anne likely encountered a sophisticated and multilingual court culture where diplomacy and patronage were essential. Here she would have been introduced to the works of classical authors, as well as to contemporary humanist writers who emphasized reason, virtue, and eloquence. The influence of this environment can be seen in Anne's later writings, which reveal a command of Latin and French, and an appreciation for classical allusions and literary style. France, known as the heartland of Renaissance humanism, further deepened Anne's education. The French court was renowned for its emphasis on the arts and letters, and Anne's time there exposed her to leading intellectuals and artistic achievements. She is believed to have been part of Queen Claude's household, where she would have received instruction in poetry, music, and dance as well as the art of conversation, an essential skill for navigating court life. This training fostered Anne's confidence and her ability to engage with powerful figures on an intellectual as well as a social level. The Renaissance humanism that Anne encountered emphasized the study of classical texts, rhetoric, and moral philosophy. This intellectual framework encouraged the development of well-rounded individuals who could speak and write persuasively, embody virtue, and participate in civic and political life. For Anne, these ideals translated into a sophisticated grasp of language and argument, which she used both in private correspondence and in the public arena of court politics. Her letters demonstrate a facility with rhetorical devices such as parallelism, metaphor, and allusion, reflecting her humanist education. Moreover, Anne's literary training was not merely academic. It was deeply connected to the performative aspects of court life. The ability to craft persuasive letters, engage in witty repartee, and present oneself as cultured and virtuous was essential for survival and success. Anne's education equipped her to excel in these areas, enabling her to build alliances, influence the king, and assert her position amid the complex dynamics of Henry VIII's court. It is also important to consider the broader context of women's literacy and rhetorical traditions in the 16th century to fully appreciate Anne's achievements. While literacy rates among women were generally lower than among men, noblewomen like Anne often received substantial education. This education included reading, writing, and sometimes Latin and other languages, preparing them to manage households, correspond with political figures, and participate in cultural life. However, such education was often limited by social expectations and gender roles, which prescribed modesty and obedience rather than public leadership. Despite these constraints, a tradition of women's rhetoric flourished in early modern Europe, particularly among aristocratic and royal women. These women used letter writing as a key medium for communication, persuasion, and influence. Letters were often crafted with great care, employing established rhetorical strategies to balance politeness with assertiveness. Anne's letters fit within this tradition, illustrating how educated women could navigate the limited spaces available to them to wield power indirectly. Anne's education and court training gave her tools to engage with these rhetorical traditions skillfully. Her letters and public speeches show an awareness of the expectations placed on women, but also a willingness to push boundaries and assert her voice. She was able to use language not just to please or placate but to negotiate, challenge, and sometimes manipulate. This rhetorical competence made her stand out in the male-dominated political arena and helped her maintain influence despite formidable opposition. Anne's grounding in Renaissance humanism and courtly culture helped shape her self-presentation and the way she wished to be remembered. Her writings reveal an understanding of how to construct an image of a learned, virtuous and articulate woman, qualities that enhanced her status and legacy. This image contrasted sharply with the negative portrayals circulated by her enemies after her fall, highlighting the enduring impact of her education on her self-identity. Anne Boleyn's education and court training were pivotal to her development as a political actor and cultural figure. Her experiences in the Netherlands and France immersed her in the intellectual currents of Renaissance humanism, providing her with linguistic skills, rhetorical tools, and a sense of cultural refinement that she carried back to England. Within the framework of 16th-century women's literacy and rhetorical traditions, Anne's education enabled her to communicate effectively, navigate court politics, and craft a lasting personal and political legacy. Her ability to merge intellectual sophistication with political savvy underscores why she remains one of the most intriguing and influential women of her era. Anne Boleyn's letters and writings offer a fascinating opportunity to explore the linguistic features and stylistic nuances of Tudor-era English, revealing much about her education, personality, and the cultural context in which she lived. Analyzing her spelling, syntax, grammar, and overall writing style sheds light on how she communicated, how her voice stands out among her contemporaries, and how her letters serve as both personal documents and political tools. English during the Tudor period was in a state of flux, marked by considerable variation in spelling, grammar, and syntax. The language had not yet been standardized, so writers often spelled words as they sounded or according to regional or personal preferences. This variability is evident in Anne's letters, where spelling inconsistencies occur alongside careful rhetorical construction. Unlike modern English, Tudor English allowed for flexible word order and sentence structures, often influenced by Latin and French grammatical patterns. This linguistic environment offered a rich palette for expression, allowing her to craft sentences that were both elegant and complex. Anne's spelling choices sometimes reflect the phonetic conventions of her time, and at other moments, a conscious adherence to certain spellings may indicate her exposure to multiple linguistic traditions. Her letters exhibit a mix of French and English vocabulary, reflecting her bilingual upbringing and education abroad. This blend enriches her writing, making it more textured and sophisticated than many of her peers. Her grammar, while sometimes unconventional by modern standards, follows the norms of early 16th-century English usage and shows a clear command of sentence structure and punctuation. One of the most distinctive features of Anne's writing style is her use of rhetorical devices and stylistic markers that suggest her personal hand and intellect. She frequently employs parallelism, balanced phrases, and antithesis, which lend a musicality and persuasive power to her prose. These elements reflect her Renaissance education and familiarity with classical rhetoric, suggesting a writer who was both thoughtful and deliberate in shaping her messages. Anne's style is also characterized by a graceful politeness combined with an underlying assertiveness. Her letters often open with courteous expressions that conform to the conventions of courtly correspondence, but beneath the surface her language can convey subtle demands, warnings, or emotional intensity. This duality is a hallmark of her writing. Her ability to mask strong feelings or political intentions beneath a veneer of decorum speaks to her sophistication and tactical acumen. Another stylistic marker associated with Anne's letters is her careful use of pronouns and address forms, which help establish relationships and hierarchies. For example, her choice of Your Grace or My Lord, when addressing Henry VIII or other nobles, is not merely formal but a strategic assertion of respect coupled with subtle reminders of her own status as queen and consort. The shifts between intimate and formal tones throughout her correspondence reveal her ability to navigate the complex social protocols of Tudor court life. When compared to contemporaries like Catherine of Aragon and Elizabeth I, Anne's linguistic and stylistic traits reveal interesting contrasts and similarities. Catherine's letters, for instance, tend to be more traditional and restrained, reflecting her Spanish upbringing and Catholic piety. Her prose often emphasizes loyalty, humility, and suffering, aligning with her position as a wronged queen and her role within a conservative religious framework. Catherine's language is typically less playful or rhetorically elaborate than Anne's, focusing instead on solemnity and moral authority. Elizabeth I, Anne's daughter, inherited many linguistic and rhetorical traits that can be traced back to her mother's influence. Elizabeth's writings, especially her famous speeches and letters, display a mastery of rhetorical techniques, a keen sense of political nuance, and a dynamic use of English that combined clarity with poetic flourish. Elizabeth's style is often more polished and mature, reflecting her long reign and experience, but it shares with Anne's letters the blend of politeness, persuasion, and assertiveness that made Tudor queenship a performance of power through language. The linguistic analysis of Anne's writing also highlights how she adapted her style depending on the audience and purpose. In private letters to family or close allies, her tone might be warmer and more direct, allowing glimpses of personal affection or frustration. In contrast, official correspondence or letters to powerful figures often employ a more measured and formal style, carefully crafted to maintain dignity and influence. This adaptability underscores Anne's rhetorical skill and her awareness of the performative nature of language at court. Moreover, Anne's writings reflect broader trends in early modern English prose, including the influence of continental literary models and the growing importance of vernacular English in political and cultural discourse. Her letters exemplify the transition from medieval Latin-dominated correspondence to a more personal and expressive English style, contributing to the evolution of English prose literature. Through her letters, Anne participated in shaping a linguistic tradition that combined personal expression with political function. Anne Boleyn's linguistic and stylistic choices are emblematic of her time yet distinctly her own. Her spelling, syntax, and grammar exhibit the fluidity of Tudor English, enriched by her education and multilingual background. Her writing style combines rhetorical sophistication with strategic politeness, allowing her to assert influence and navigate courtly politics deftly. When viewed alongside contemporaries like Catherine of Aragon and Elizabeth I, Anne's letters reveal a unique voice, one that balances vulnerability and strength, personal emotion and political calculation. This linguistic legacy not only deepens our understanding of Anne as a historical figure but also illuminates the evolving nature of English prose during a pivotal era in the nation's cultural history. The history of Anne Boleyn's letters is complicated by the presence of forgeries, disputed documents, and questionable attributions, a problem not uncommon in Tudor epistolary history. Letters from this period are highly valued sources, not only for their personal content but also for their political significance, which has made them prime targets for manipulation and fabrication. Understanding the extent and nature of these forgeries is crucial to interpreting Anne's historical image and the political uses of her correspondence. Forgery in Tudor letter collections was widespread for several reasons. First, letters were powerful tools for shaping public perception and influencing court politics. Because Anne Boleyn was a controversial figure, both loved and hated in her lifetime and beyond, her words carried immense weight. Letters attributed to her could validate or undermine claims about her character, intentions, and actions. Thus, fabricating or altering her correspondence offered a potent means of propaganda, enabling different factions to support their narratives or discredit opponents. Many letters claimed to be from Anne or addressed to her have been questioned by historians due to inconsistencies in language, style, handwriting, or historical context. The lack of original manuscripts for some letters complicates authentication, as copies or transcripts might have been tampered with over time. Some letters bear marks of deliberate alteration, while others exhibit anachronistic language or references to events that postdate Anne's life, indicating forgery. Scholars often use criteria such as handwriting analysis, linguistic and stylistic comparisons, historical plausibility, and provenance to assess authenticity. For example, genuine Anne Boleyn letters tend to reflect her known rhetorical style, vocabulary, and personal concerns. Letters that deviate significantly from these patterns raise suspicion. Furthermore, the context in which a letter surfaces, such as who preserved it and why, can provide clues about its authenticity or fabrication. Disputed letters attributed to and sometimes emerge from political motivations. During her rise and fall, her enemies might have created false letters to justify her arrest and execution, portraying her as scheming, disloyal, or immoral. Conversely, sympathizers or later historians could have forged letters to cast her as a martyr or victim, emphasizing loyalty and piety. These competing agendas complicate efforts to separate fact from fiction and demand careful critical analysis. One famous example of disputed correspondence is the so-called Tower Letter, allegedly written by Anne from the Tower of London before her execution. While the letter's tone and content have sparked debate over whether Anne authored it, some scholars suggest it may have been written by a supporter seeking to craft a narrative of innocence and martyrdom. This letter's status illustrates how contested documents can serve as vehicles for shaping Anne's legacy long after her death. Fabricated letters also played a role in the broader Tudor power struggles, where control of narrative was a key weapon. For instance, during Henry VIII's reign, courtiers and factions used letters attributed to Anne to sway the king or the council, influence foreign diplomats, or manipulate public opinion. After her death, Tudor chroniclers and propagandists continued this practice, producing works that included forged or altered letters to support their versions of history. In the posthumous context, forged letters contributed to the mythologizing of Anne Boleyn. Depending on the political or religious climate, writers cast her either as a tragic heroine who fell victim to injustice or as a manipulative temptress who deserved her fate. Letters were a primary means to communicate these images, lending supposed authenticity to these portrayals. As a result, the corpus of Anne's letters became a contested terrain where truth and fiction intermingled. The motivations behind forging Anne's letters varied but were often tied to contemporary needs. For example, Protestant reformers might have circulated forged letters that highlighted Anne's sympathies toward reformist ideas, using her as a symbol for their cause. Conversely, Catholic conservatives might have forged documents to depict her as a dangerous heretic or immoral influence over Henry VIII. Each side used letters as evidence in religious and political debates, showing how epistolary forgeries could influence broader historical trajectories. In addition to ideological uses, personal vendettas and family rivalries also played a role. The Boleyn family's enemies could forge incriminating letters to damage their reputation or justify punitive actions. Similarly, family members or supporters might produce flattering letters to protect the family legacy or negotiate favor with the crown. These personal and factional interests contributed to the complex web of authenticity questions surrounding Anne's correspondence. The problem of forgeries also highlights the challenges historians face in reconstructing Tudor history. Because many original documents have been lost or destroyed over the centuries, reliance on copies, transcriptions, or second-hand accounts increases the risk of accepting inauthentic texts. The political sensitivity of Anne Boleyn's life and death means that her letters were especially vulnerable to manipulation, and historians must approach them with a critical eye, balancing skepticism with a careful reading of the evidence. Modern scholarship employs various methods to detect forgeries, including forensic analysis of ink and paper, digital comparisons of handwriting, and linguistic forensics examining vocabulary and syntax patterns. These tools have helped to clarify the authenticity of some disputed letters but have not resolved all controversies. The enduring presence of forged or questionable letters in the historical record ensures that Anne's epistolary legacy remains partially obscured by uncertainty. Ultimately, the story of forgeries and disputed letters surrounding Anne Boleyn underscores the power of written documents in Tudor political culture. Letters were more than personal messages. They were instruments of influence, manipulation, and survival. For Anne, whose fate was tied to the precarious favor of the king and the court, the authenticity of her words has profound implications for how we understand her life, personality, and historical role. The ongoing debates over her letters serve as a reminder that history is not merely a collection of facts but often a contest over narrative and memory. In Anne's case, the intertwining of genuine writings and forged documents reflects the contested nature of her legacy. A queen whose voice was silenced by execution but whose words, whether authentic or fabricated, continue to shape her story centuries later. Anne Boleyn's letters are a rich repository of religious themes and Reformation rhetoric that shed light on her personal beliefs as well as the turbulent religious climate of early 16th century England. Throughout her correspondence, one can detect Protestant overtones that align her with emerging reformist ideas, though the extent to which she was an active religious reformer or simply a pawn in broader political religious struggles remains a matter of historical debate. Her letters often employ biblical references and theological language, revealing a deep engagement with religious discourse that reflects both her intellectual milieu and the ideological battles unfolding around her. Anne's religious writings must be understood in the context of the English Reformation, a period marked by Henry VIII's break with the Roman Catholic Church and the rise of Protestant doctrines. The Reformation was not merely a theological dispute but also a profound political upheaval, involving questions of royal authority, national identity, and social order. Within this charged environment, Anne's correspondence frequently incorporates language and imagery drawn from scripture and Protestant theology, suggesting her awareness of, if not full commitment to, the new religious ideas circulating among Henry's court and his advisors. Protestant themes in Anne's letters are often subtle but significant. She sometimes references concepts such as grace, faith, and the authority of Scripture, key tenets of Protestant belief. Her use of biblical quotations or allusions points to a sophisticated engagement with Scripture, consistent with the humanist education she received abroad and the reformist circles she encountered. This scriptural literacy enabled her to communicate with religious nuance and authority, an unusual ability for women of her time, and one that enhanced her political stature. Whether Anne was a genuine religious reformer or primarily a pawn in the religious transformations of the period is a question that has divided historians. Some view her as an earnest advocate for Protestant ideas, using her position to promote religious change and influence Henry's policies. Others argue that she was more of a political instrument, caught between powerful factions and utilizing religious rhetoric as a means to an end rather than from deep conviction. In truth, her role may have combined elements of both. She likely held sincere reformist sympathies while also navigating the perilous political currents of Henry's court. The theological language in Anne's letters is notable not only for its content but also for its strategic use. Biblical references served multiple functions. They conveyed piety, lent moral authority to her words, and helped frame her personal and political struggles in terms of divine justice and providence. This framing was particularly important as Anne faced increasing opposition and eventual downfall. By invoking religious themes, she could present herself as a righteous figure wronged by earthly powers, thus appealing to both spiritual and temporal audiences. The intertwining of religion and politics in Anne's letters underscores the complexity of her position. Her religious language was part of a broader rhetorical strategy that blended faith, loyalty, and ambition. This strategy reflected the realities of Tudor court life, where religious identity was inseparable from political allegiance and survival. Anne's correspondence thus reveals a woman who was not only a participant in the Reformation but also a skilled rhetorician using religious discourse to assert influence and defend her position. Parallel to the religious dimension of Anne's writings is the question of gender, power, and voice. As a woman operating within the intensely male-dominated world of Tudor courts, Anne's use of language was both constrained and empowered by her gender. Women's voices in this period were often marginalized or mediated through male authority, yet Anne's letters demonstrate how she carved out a distinctive voice that challenged and negotiated these limitations. Her correspondence reveals the subtle and subversive ways in which she employed language and wit to assert agency and navigate the complex hierarchies of court. In a society where female power was largely exercised behind the scenes or through influence over men, Anne's letters show her engaging in a kind of linguistic diplomacy that was both strategic and creative. She used humor, irony, and veiled criticism to convey messages that could not be spoken openly. This subversive use of language allowed her to participate in political discourse without overstepping social norms that restricted women's direct involvement in power. Anne's rhetorical skill thus became a tool for survival and influence, enabling her to wield power through voice rather than force. The question of whether Anne Boleyn can be seen as an early feminist icon or more accurately as a strategic survivor is complex. On one hand, her education, intellectual confidence, and assertiveness were remarkable for a woman of her time. She challenged traditional gender roles by actively engaging in political and religious debates and by asserting her own identity and ambitions. Her letters, which reflect a keen awareness of gender dynamics and an ability to manipulate them, suggest a proto-feminist sensibility that sought to expand the possibilities for women's voices and authority. On the other hand, Anne's actions were deeply embedded in the pragmatic realities of Tudor court politics. Her primary goal was survival and advancement within a volatile and often dangerous environment. Her use of language and wit can thus be understood as tactics deployed to navigate and exploit existing power structures rather than outright efforts to dismantle them. She operated within the frameworks available to her, making shrewd use of the limited agency afforded to noblewomen in her era. Anne's correspondence reveals a nuanced portrait of a woman who was both constrained by and adept at manipulating the gendered expectations of her society. Her letters reflect a constant balancing act, asserting strength and independence while maintaining the appearance of obedience and decorum expected of a queen consort. This duality is part of what makes her a compelling historical figure. She was neither simply a victim of patriarchal oppression nor a revolutionary icon, but a complex individual navigating her world with intelligence and resilience. Anne Boleyn's letters provide invaluable insights into the intersections of religion, gender, and power in Tudor England. Her engagement with Protestant rhetoric and biblical language places her at the heart of the religious transformations of her time, whether as a committed reformer or a skilled participant in political religious maneuvering. Simultaneously, her command of language and rhetorical strategy highlights how women's voices could be both constrained and subversively powerful within male-dominated courts. Anne's writings, therefore, stand as testament to the multifaceted ways in which identity, belief, and agency were negotiated in one of history's most dramatic periods. Anne Boleyn's letters have been a subject of fascination and intense scrutiny for centuries, with historians interpreting them through shifting cultural, political, and academic lenses. The ways in which scholars have read and understood these documents reveal not only changing views of Anne herself but also evolving historical methodologies and ideologies. Over time, interpretations of Anne's letters have ranged from romanticized idealization to critical skepticism, from feminist reclamation to revisionist skepticism. These diverse readings illustrate how the same set of texts can be reimagined to fit the concerns and values of different eras. In the earliest centuries after Anne's death, her letters were often filtered through the lens of Tudor propaganda and the chroniclers who supported Henry VIII's reign. During this period, many historians and writers depicted Anne as a manipulative and ambitious figure whose letters served as evidence of her moral failings and political scheming. This interpretation aligned with the dominant narrative of Anne as a villain who had overreached her place and thus deserved her tragic end. Letters attributed to her were read as admissions of guilt or tools of seduction, reinforcing a cautionary tale about female power and ambition. As time progressed into the 18th and 19th centuries, Romantic writers and historians began to reinterpret Anne's letters and persona in a more sympathetic light. Influenced by broader cultural shifts that valued emotion, individualism, and tragic heroes, these readers portrayed Anne as a victim of circumstance, wronged by a tyrannical king and swept away by political machinations beyond her control. Her letters were seen as heartfelt expressions of love, loyalty, and innocence, transforming her into a tragic heroine whose downfall elicited pity rather than condemnation. This romanticized view emphasized the personal and emotional content of her correspondence, often at the expense of political context or critical analysis. The emergence of feminist historical perspectives in the 20th century brought another significant shift in the interpretation of Anne's letters. Feminist scholars sought to reclaim Anne as a figure of female agency and intellect, highlighting the ways in which her writings demonstrated political savvy, rhetorical skill, and resistance within a patriarchal system. Through this lens, her letters became evidence of a woman navigating power structures with intelligence and determination rather than passive victimhood. Feminist readings emphasized the subversive uses of language, the negotiation of gender norms, and the assertion of a female voice in a male-dominated world. Anne's letters thus gained new respect as documents revealing the complexities of female authority and survival. At the same time, revisionist historians began to approach Anne's letters with critical rigor, emphasizing the need to distinguish authentic writings from forgeries and to situate her correspondence within the broader political, religious, and social contexts of Tudor England. These scholars questioned earlier sentimental or ideological readings and sought to reconstruct a more nuanced and evidence-based picture of Anne's life and legacy. They highlighted the political functions of her letters as tools of influence, propaganda, and negotiation, revealing the intertwining of personal and political motives. This academic trend underscored the fluidity of Anne's image, shaped as much by historical circumstance as by her own actions and words. The cumulative effect of these historiographical shifts has been a gradual transformation of Anne Boleyn's public and academic image from villain to victim to icon. This transformation reflects broader changes in historical scholarship, including greater attention to gender, power and language, as well as evolving cultural attitudes toward female figures in history. Today, Anne's letters are appreciated not only for their literary qualities but also as complex artifacts that embody the contradictions and tensions of Tudor court life, religious upheaval and gender politics. They serve as key texts through which historians engage with questions of authorship, authenticity, agency, and legacy. Alongside academic interpretations, Anne Boleyn's letters have also been reimagined and popularized in novels, films, and television, contributing to the shaping of her legacy in the public imagination. Historical fiction and dramatizations often take creative liberties with her correspondence, sometimes inventing letters or expanding brief historical notes into rich emotional or political scenes. This fictionalization has helped keep Anne's story alive and accessible but also introduces challenges regarding the blending of fact and fiction. Popular TV series like The Tudors and literary works such as Wolf Hall have featured Anne's letters or references to them, dramatizing her thoughts and emotions in ways that captivate audiences but occasionally depart from historical accuracy. These portrayals often emphasize her passion, wit, and tragic destiny, using imagined letters to fill gaps in the historical record and to deepen character development. While these creative choices enrich storytelling, they risk conflating fictional invention with historical fact, potentially misleading audiences about the true content and context of Anne's writings. The danger of mixing fact and fiction in the portrayal of Anne's letters lies in the potential distortion of historical understanding. When fictional letters are accepted as genuine or when dramatizations oversimplify complex political and religious realities, the public's perception of Anne can become skewed. This blurring of lines can reinforce myths, perpetuate stereotypes, or obscure the nuanced realities of Tudor history. It also complicates scholarly efforts to communicate historical truths when popular culture has already shaped widespread impressions. Nevertheless, the influence of imagined letters and dramatized correspondence cannot be dismissed. They play a vital role in popularizing history, engaging broad audiences and inspiring interest in Tudor England. These creative reinterpretations invite viewers and readers to explore Anne's life and times, often sparking curiosity that leads to deeper historical inquiry. The challenge lies in balancing entertainment with accuracy, encouraging critical consumption of historical fiction alongside respect for primary sources. The historiographical journey of Anne Boleyn's letters and their cultural representations highlights the dynamic interplay between history, memory, and storytelling. The evolving interpretations by historians demonstrate how shifting scholarly paradigms and societal values shape our understanding of the past. Meanwhile, the reimagining of her letters in popular culture underscores the continuing power of narrative to define historical figures for new generations. Together, these threads weave a complex tapestry that keeps Anne Boleyn's voice, both real and imagined, alive in the collective consciousness. Anne Boleyn's letters, despite being centuries old, continue to resonate with readers today, offering insights that reach far beyond the specific historical circumstances in which they were written. These personal expressions provide a unique window into the life of a woman who lived at the heart of one of England's most tumultuous periods. The letters reveal not only the intimate thoughts and feelings of a queen but also the broader dynamics of power, politics, and gender that remain relevant to contemporary discussions about leadership, agency, and identity. One of the most striking aspects of Anne's correspondence is its enduring emotional and human quality. Through her letters, readers glimpse the complexity of a figure often reduced to caricature, as either a villainous seductress or a martyr saint. Instead, the letters show a multifaceted individual grappling with love, ambition, fear, hope, and disappointment. This emotional honesty allows modern audiences to connect with and across time, fostering a sense of historical empathy. The rawness of her expressions, whether they reveal passion, frustration, or resilience, humanizes a woman who is frequently seen only through the lens of political drama. This emotional depth is a key reason why Anne's letters remain compelling. They remind us that behind the grand narratives of history lie real people with personal struggles and desires. Such a realization challenges simplistic interpretations and encourages a more nuanced understanding of the past. It invites readers to consider how individuals navigate the constraints imposed by their social and political environments, a theme that resonates across ages and cultures. Beyond personal insight, Anne's letters also teach important lessons about power and politics. Her writings reveal how language can be wielded as a tool for influence, survival, and resistance. In a world dominated by male authority, Anne's ability to communicate strategically, whether through persuasion, coded references, or subtle diplomacy, demonstrates the power of rhetoric in shaping political outcomes. Her letters illustrate that power is not only exercised through physical force or official decree but also through the manipulation of words, relationships, and perceptions. Anne's correspondence exposes the precarious nature of power, especially for those who depend on favor rather than formal authority. Her rise and fall under how political fortunes can be fragile and subject to the shifting whims of those in control. The letters reveal how Anne sought to negotiate her position through both overt and covert means, balancing loyalty and ambition in a volatile court environment. This duality serves as a timeless lesson about the complexities of leadership and the need for adaptability in the face of changing circumstances. The gender dynamics embedded in Anne's letters offer particularly rich material for reflection. As a woman in a patriarchal society, Anne faced structural limitations on her autonomy and authority. Her letters reveal how she used the tools available to her, education, wit, religious rhetoric, to assert a voice and exert influence in male-dominated spaces. This negotiation between constraint and agency highlights the ongoing challenges women face in asserting power within systems designed to marginalize them. Anne's writings can thus be seen as early examples of subversive female agency. They show how language and intellect became instruments for challenging gender norms, even if only within the narrow confines permitted by her status and context. This dimension of her legacy speaks to broader struggles for gender equality and representation, offering inspiration and historical precedent for those seeking to understand how women have historically navigated exclusion and oppression. In addition to their personal and political significance, Anne's letters serve as invaluable cultural artifacts. They are physical remnants of a past world, bearing the marks of historical events and personal experiences. As manuscripts, they carry the weight of time, linking contemporary readers with the material culture of the Tudor court. Their preservation allows historians and the public to engage directly with primary sources, providing a tactile connection to history that enriches our comprehension of the era. The letters function as tools of historical empathy, encouraging readers to imagine the thoughts and emotions of someone from a vastly different time and place. This imaginative engagement fosters a deeper appreciation of history as lived experience rather than abstract fact. By contemplating Anne's words, readers gain insight into the hopes, fears, and complexities that shaped historical actors, helping to humanize and demystify the past. The legacy of Anne's letters also extends into contemporary discussions about the importance of preserving and interpreting historical documents. They underscore the challenges and responsibilities inherent in working with sources that are fragmentary, disputed, or mediated by political agendas. The letters remind us that history is not static but is continually reshaped by new discoveries, interpretations, and cultural perspectives. Engaging with Anne's correspondence thus becomes an active process of negotiation between past and present, requiring critical thinking and an awareness of context. Moreover, Anne's letters highlight the value of personal narratives within history. While political events and grand narratives often dominate historical study, personal letters provide texture, complexity, and diversity to our understanding of the past. They show how individuals experience and influence larger forces, adding depth and humanity to historical accounts. This focus on personal voice enriches the study of history and encourages a more inclusive approach that recognizes the significance of varied experiences. In the realm of cultural memory, Anne Boleyn's letters continue to inspire artists, writers, and scholars, fueling creativity and debate. Their emotional intensity and political resonance have made them a touchstone for exploring themes of love, betrayal, power, and resilience. Whether in academic research, literature, or popular media, these letters serve as a catalyst for ongoing engagement with one of history's most enigmatic figures. Anne Boleyn's letters remain deeply relevant today because they transcend their immediate historical context to speak to universal human experiences. They offer lessons about the complexities of power and politics, especially in relation to gender, and demonstrate the enduring significance of language as a means of agency and expression. As cultural artifacts, they bridge past and present, inviting empathy and critical reflection. Through these personal writings, Anne's voice continues to echo, reminding us that history is not just about dates and events but about people, their struggles and their stories.